Are you guys aware that through the years, let me give you this concept and then we'll kind of work through this. We're going to talk a little bit about David today. And we've been talking through the past several weeks about confrontation / conflict and trying to help us to recognize why we're comfortable avoiding conflict, avoiding confrontation, mostly because we don't like the way it makes us feel, or we don't like potentially the outcomes for us. But we're leading in some ways to a culmination that there are times when it's necessary. And I'm going to suggest to you very strongly, we're in those times, folks. We're in those times where you can back away from the possibilities of conflict, but I would suggest strongly that you're not perhaps doing what it is that the Lord's called us to do. And if indeed we're going to present to people that the good news of Jesus, that's going to play a major conflict in most people's day-to-day ideology because they're not anticipating encountering Jesus. Plus, they don't really want to encounter Jesus because of what it seems to represent to them, which is a conflict. But if your job is to go and to tell and to share the good news, then you've got to get yourself ready, get yourself iced, get yourself cool enough to be able to deal with the aftermath when you share the good news, because it's going to be in some ways a confrontation. It's going to be a conflict. I will say with you, part of the reason we've done the study together is many good quality changes that we can look at historically and societally, socially, occur through conflict and confrontation.
Really? Very good.
A lot of growth occurs. Butting heads, not agreeing, is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is in today's world. Because this world is rampant with likes and dislikes and unfriending and canceling. And so a lot of us, certainly not having grown up in that environment, are uncomfortable having people kind of rate us in a like, unlike, friend, unfriend, cancel kind of culture. And folks, we got to be bigger than that. And so that means that sometimes you got to be spoiling for the opportunity to have these kind of confrontations, because ultimately the outcome, think about it. If we abide by Acts 1:8, the idea is for us, and this is why churches have gotten it wrong for so many years. As you go, make disciples, right? And baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But as you go, it means in your daily life, not hanging around with the country clubs worship people. You've got to be hanging out with people who don't know who Jesus is, and you've got to look for opportunities to tell them about Jesus. And that itself sometimes creates a conflict in you, and you go, I'd rather just wet my pants than even think about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
For wetting my pants?
Well, no. We're tying it all together. This is what this little bit right here is what I've been needing to find out where this is headed. And the discomfort we have with telling somebody, you know, you've got this going on, or you're trailing toilet paper or whatever, is a minimal sort of thing when it comes to eternity, and we need to be able to confront the eternal situations, and maybe we have to work our way up to that. But I think that's a very good point. Is there's a discomfort that we experience when we have to talk to somebody about, hey, where are you going to spend eternity? And I love this. Now, I've been kind of like, okay, why confrontation? I really don't care for confrontation. What's it have to do with anything? Now I see what it has to do with everything. Thank you very much.
We're in a training incubation chamber, folks, and that's why we sometimes, especially, almost would say Daniel San and Michaela and Christian, it's easier for those guys to learn stuff because they're kind of amped for learning right now. Some of us in this room, those of us over 30, think we're grown and we know most everything, and we're not very teachable. So you kind of have to accidentally, in some ways, teach adults. You have to kind of have them accidentally fall into it and go, oh, that's what that means. And then we get a little bit more okay with the learning because we think we're supposed to know everything. And so adults really struggle with learning or grasping sometimes new concepts, even if they're important.
Okay, now I think you're making fun of the old man.
I would be included in that.
Okay.
So I resemble it.
Right. Okay.
So let me start out with this philosophy, and then we'll kind of take a look at some things, and we'll go to assail King David. Okay. If you've heard this concept before, let me know. In the essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. Okay? This is the principle by which the evangelistic, Jesus-oriented church should operate. We don't, but we should. Okay? So in the essentials, unity. In the non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. So let me give you a couple of things from yesteryear where maybe I can paint this picture for you and have your thought juices going, and then I'll sort of mention some things today. So in the older days, and some of these things still exist today, how you baptize is a deal breaker for Christians. So much so that it starts other denominations. Yep. Do you sprinkle? Do you dip? Do you immerse? Those things have created offshoots that are whole different denominations.
Do you immerse forwards or backwards?
Correct. Right. Well, we didn't. Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I can baptize you with a squirt gun, right?
Possibly. Sure. Is baptism salvific, or is it just an obedience and a symbol?
But that was a big word. Can you
salvific?
Can you break that apart? For
is it of a saving nature?
Very good. Can you spell that?
That's it. B-I-E-S. With the word salvific. Latin etymology, mister. Appreciate it.
Welcome home.
I'm telling you. Right now, like a Nate just a little better than the other.
And Nate's like, uh-huh.
Gifts of the Spirit.
Oh,
okay? If you don't speak in tongues, you're not considered saved. If you don't believe in kind of the gift of healing, you're not saved. If you don't believe in by his stripes, you have physical healing attributed to your salvation, you're not saved. Let's create different denominations. See Catherine Coleman. 7 days of creation. 7 literal days of creation.
6.
Yes. 7 days the Lord took a break.
Like he needed it. No. That's for us.
6,000-year-old earth/mankind. Okay. Praying in Jesus' name. Saying literal words in Jesus' name. Losing your salvation. The Methodists, that's one of the major practices of Methodists, which is you can lose your salvation. Talk with the Wesley brothers there. The Lord's Prayer, needing the actual words of our Father who art in heaven, needing to be recited when we gather together.
What language?
Thank you. We like it in English.
English.
Sure.
Latin.
Saturday or Sunday as the major worship day.
Every day.
Purple.
Yes, that would be correct, says Paul. Those issues are those that create dissension amongst believers and then create offshoots of denomination. Now, part of the reason that you've got those offshoots is because there was some conflict and confrontation and people went, we need to take our toys and go elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Let me give you a few more that exist more so today for us. At least in the world I'm traveling in, I'm encountering so many Christians, people who are professed Christians, afraid of COVID death and COVID infection.
Yep.
It is absolutely stupefying to me. Stupefying. I have heard so many people who are professed Christians, even leaders of churches today, saying that phrase. We are all God's children. We are all God's children. The Pope will tell you that. God made people LBTQ XYRZ. Right? God made people with those particular preferences, which is right now I just got cancer.
Yes, you did.
Physical intimacy. is not for pleasure, just for procreation. Okay? You younger people, put your fingers in the ears that you did not hear. We are destroying the earth. See, climate change. Okay? We are destroying the earth. Gathering super spreaders, people together, bad. Bad. And I didn't even put in singing together. Okay? And one that's maybe a minor issue, but that's maybe permeated both of these perhaps groups over the last 50, 60 years. There's really no such condemnation as hell. Can you understand how if you have a certain position on these based where the scriptures are, if you have a discussion, even with a person with whom you're supposed to be living in harmony, there's going to be conflict. And that conflict is going to, if you continue the discussion, is going to create a confrontation in some ways where there's going to be, look, negotiation, compromise are very key. That's a statesmanship practice that doesn't exist in and amongst Americans today. Yes, sir.
All of the ones that you mentioned, I can kind of take or leave, but the last one, I think that's kind of critical to understanding the need for salvation. If there's no hell, then why bother?
Let me pose that question to you all right now, since you asked that. I think that's a credible and valid question.
Oh, thank you. Feel better now.
He's been validated today.
That's right.
Dig it. Why does hell matter? By the way, very few of your praise and worship songs created today talk about hell.
It's not to be praised or worshipped.
I've got my smart pants on today, is where you are, mister.
I was going to try to be quiet again.
When does that ever work? Okay.
Still working on it.
Only when he's mad at me.
Okay, we're going to move quickly. So why does that concept at all matter? And I hear what you're saying, Gene, that we're not praising and worshiping because hell's not necessarily a good thing. But your hymns of yesteryear are chock full of that salvific comprehension that in addition to, see, the good part is you get to spend eternity in the presence of Yahweh God with Jesus. That's the bonus. But the other bonus is you don't get eternal not being with him.
And given that perspective, I can kind of take or leave it because it is all about the positive. It's all about where you're going to spend eternity with a loving God. He did everything he could to make certain you were going to be with him. It's up to us to do the rest.
Yes, and I appreciate where you are, but that's a really mature position to understand that the only reason to really be saved is to spend eternity with your Creator. See, a lot of us like to, sometimes maybe it's our sin nature, we like to know what we don't get. That's the motivator.
Some people wouldn't think about, why do I need to even think about that? I don't even know about this God thing or whatever.
Right.
If hell wasn't an issue, it's something to say, well, let me check this out more. Let me look more into that. Because if that's true,
Right.
I want to look otherwise.
Yes, I don't want to go there. And so sometimes we operate as humans based on what we don't want to happen. We don't like the negative consequence. And especially in the God relationship, I can tell you, professed Christians struggle with loving Jesus so much that that's what they want to do. They want to love him so much that they want to be with him. The kind of the opposite works, which is, if there really is hell, I'd pretty much rather not go there. Yes. And the generation probably that encompasses our parents, a lot of the teaching and training that they had was kind of that fire insurance, that fear centers in the hands of an angry God, motivated a lot of the generations before us, as opposed to, and this is probably the best and only positive I'll give to praise and worship music today. It spends a lot of time talking about Jesus' God's love, and that's cool. But you also have to kind of balance. You have to balance. And so sometimes this generation, their definition of love isn't isn't really what God's love is. It's kind of warm, fuzzy, let's everybody hug, kumbaya kind of stuff. As opposed to what we're talking about sometimes is when you love people, you got to tell them hard truths. You got to have conflict and confrontation sometimes. That's why parents and kids aren't always on the same page. Because the parent is probably the only person going, you can't and don't.
Keep telling you.
Wow.
I'm not in that either.
There's something going on here. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It's the whole Thanksgiving. The MSG and the turkey.
Thank you for Thanksgiving. I had fish.
So did Ellen. So nothing like a Thanksgiving fish.
Absolutely. I'm sure they had it up in Boston.
And so part of the reason that we've spent our time doing this is to help you get comfortable with, and we've talked about some of your past being confronted and you're confronting people and your discomfort perhaps at why that occurred. And we took a look at Matthew 18 over the past couple of weeks to show what's supposed to happen through confrontation, how the Bible supports that, and how Jesus is endorsing that the practice that involves a witness in a community setting is perfectly fine because he, through Yahweh God, gave that edict to the Israelites back in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And so it's perfectly fine that conflict and confrontation can happen when the outcome is reconciliation and restoration. Now that's for brothers and sisters in Jesus, all right, Matthew 18.
Right.
But sometimes what we're also talking about is conflict. Now, we're helping maybe to help you build muscle with people with whom you come into contact with by telling them the good news and recognizing already you're at loggerheads. Because you're going to be dealing with people that are dealing with, we hate Donald Trump, somebody canceled my favorite TV show, I'm relegated to streaming shows, reruns I don't want to see, I'm stuck in my house. So there's a whole bunch of frustrations, and you're trying to tell people there's a better way. There's good news to tell you, even though this is what's going on right now, and people don't want to hear it. Because their gaming is challenged in a way that's not been challenged before.
Their gaming?
Sure.
We tend to like to wallow in our discomforts rather than kind of accept someone else's ideas of what something better could be.
I think you're right about that. Suicide. I would suggest that that's the case. If that's the case, I've postulated, and maybe unfairly so, we weren't built to be isolated beings. We're built to be gregarious. We're built to be social. The Lord built us to worship congregately, even though you can worship individually. And you're dealing with a population in many ways who reports that say it's high stress. So the high stress then also added to the fact that people aren't allowed to congregate to have stress relief opportunities. And you're also dealing with a culture that believes the good of the one, which is the state, is more important than the good of the individual. You're going to look at potentially an increase in suicides. And that's why in many ways I say, as the United States practices, in many ways that's how the rest of the world is influenced. Even countries that are perhaps communistic, Shinto-based, that have a different societal practice than the democracy of the representative republic here in the United States. So comments there before I help hopefully bridge this into our bashing David session. If you struggled with some of this stuff during Thanksgiving, I will tell you that the Lord has terrifically given us a second and third opportunity with Christmas en route and New Year's. So when those are curtailed from a social aspect and you're told what you can and can't do, I would challenge and suggest go and tell folks that this too shall pass and there's a better remedy. And that remedy is Jesus. That's going to create some loggerheads. We're going to get to 2 Samuel. In fact, you know what? That's what I'd like us to do. Let's go to 2 Samuel 11:1. 2 Samuel 11:1. And I'm going to read from the NIV, and hopefully if I get lucky, I'm going to get to 12:7. Now, in my NIV, it's titled David and Bathsheba. And a fun fact maybe for you to consider. King David is one of the top 10, if not top 5, Jewish heroes. Regularly, they like to gloss over this David and Bathsheba and spend more time talking about his conquests and how great an individual he was, as opposed to this situation, which is riveting and very, very important in the life of King David, which we're going to take a look at in a second. So, 2 Samuel 11:1 begins in my NIV. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and he walked around on the roof of the palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone out to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. And she had purified herself from her uncleanness. And then she went back home, and the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I'm pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite," and Joab sent him to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. So let me just give you a brief snapshot of what's going on there. This was a custom that the king had just excused Uriah from going back into war. So he wanted him to take a respite and then hang out at his house as a guy who didn't have to go back into the war. But Uriah doesn't do that. When David was told Uriah did not go home, he asked him, "Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home?" And Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." And then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And at David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. Didn't go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is the fiercest, and then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men of David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you finish giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerub-Besheth? Didn't the woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Also your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" That'll make David shut up. Mm-hmm. The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had set him up to say. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, so the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." And when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. The thing David had done pleased the Lord. And now we're at 12, and my heading here is Nathan rebukes David. The Lord sent Nathan to David, and when he came to him, he said, "There were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. He shared his food, drink from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "Surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." And Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you over king of Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house to you, your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, took his wife to be your own, you killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me, took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." So it's pretty easy for Christians to read this and be ready to rip King David apart. And we're going to do that. But let's take a look first at who David is. Let's take a look at who David is. Because I think when we read this, sometimes we don't read maybe as past generations do because we have TV and we have video games and we have things that sort of don't allow our imagination to paint pictures for us. This passes very, very quickly, and it looks like David tells the king a story, Nathan tells the king a story, king hears the story, responds to it the way Nathan had intended, and then David is convicted. Please be aware, this was a very challenging situation for Nathan to walk into. Please be aware that although you might feel that you'd be comfortable, say, in the presence of Governor Northam or the presence of President Trump, that's not necessarily the situation that existed in this time when you're going to address the king, especially when, almost like Nehemiah, almost like Esther, you're dependent on for good stuff. And you're dependent on for stuff only when the king says, "I want the stuff." Okay? So a couple things. Let's take a look at these. And I think there's some bullets here that may help us. And I titled our beginning of getting into this before we take a look at our last confrontation point is before we assail, knock out, beat up King David, let's explore his pedigree, his status, his accomplishments. Let's give him his props. Okay? David was the best mortal Israel king ever. By the way, don't believe something just because you hear me say it. You get to say, what are you talking about? He was the best mortal Israel king ever. Okay, push back.
I'm looking at the verse, so I have it up on the screen.
Some might want to challenge that Solomon was better. I would say no. See, go ahead, Michaela. What's that? What do you think?
Well, I've read both.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of reasons to pick Solomon in some regard. I would probably change. Well, I'm going to make one point to finish, and that might stick with us. And I think that there's a smokescreen that happens with Solomon. Here's where the smokescreen is. He starts off like a giant. Doggone it. He starts off like a giant. When you read his prayer of dedication to the temple, it's huge. And when the Lord asks him, "What do you want?" Whew, he says, "I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like a little child. I don't know how to come out and go in. Will you give your servant wisdom?" And Yahweh goes, "Wisdom? How about boom, everything?" Now here's where I like Michaela's challenge to this. We don't know how long after he gets everything that he decides he wants everything that he doesn't already think he has. Yeah. When we read the book of Proverbs, we see a guy who's writing in many ways because he laments the life that he lived. after the Lord blessed him. And so he decided to try almost everything out there in life because what the Lord's given him in terms of wisdom and wealth is not enough for him.
Did you mean Proverbs or did you mean Ecclesiastes?
Proverbs and Ecclesiastes with the more lamenting aspects, but certainly Proverbs with the this is the ideal of how to do stuff. This is how it should work. Yes, Ecclesiastes. Yeah. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. So what we kind of believe is it looks like Solomon starts well, and it looks like he may finish well. Here's what we know about David, and this is a thing that we're going to go back to as a theme. There's no one else in the Bible that's called a man after God's own heart.
The other couple of things that come to mind is after Solomon goes off the scene, the people are ready for some relief because he's basically been driving them real hard.
Yeah.
So he's no longer a popular king.
Correct.
But David really only has on his kingship just these couple of blemishes. He's got the Bathsheba incident and the Absalom incident.
Yeah.
And beyond that, he's revered and loved and cared for, and he is the popular king. He's the one that cares for people, and I can kind of see what you're talking about. I understand Michaela's point
Sure.
of view because he there's no one to match his wisdom, but as it turns out, he doesn't necessarily use the wisdom all the time.
Correct.
Because, I mean, 1,000 women, it takes you forever to kiss them all goodnight.
Right. and if I were you, I would curtail those comments to just that.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm saying that.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in what it is that you just shared. And the other thing sometimes that we'll talk a little bit about it here, at least as a mention, the temple that's glorious that Solomon builds, David put all the materials and placed the folks in place to do that. He spent all of his resources so that his son would be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the credit goes to Solomon for the building, but the acquisition and putting all the workmen in position, David did all that. Cool. I would also suggest to you that the territory was the largest when King David was the king. Because when Solomon became king afterwards, through marriage and compromise, he would give away parts of the promised land because of negotiation, because of treaties. And David, remember, was a warrior king, so he was always looking to expand the territory of Israel.
Which is why he shouldn't have been at home this particular occasion.
Yes, and that's something that Steve, when we've had discussions about David, especially from a history standpoint, and Steve's kind of our history guy, the old kings weren't like our modern day generals. General Patton doesn't go out on battlefield, right? But King David, who's even the king, he's leading the battle. See Braveheart.
That's why when we see references like that, we'll say something to the effect of who will lead her going out and coming in. That's what it's referencing. It's referencing that it's time to go out to battle. Who's going to lead that?
Correct. And that was the king in front. And a lot of times that's how you could get to be king if you were the guy who had the most victory stripes from leading the battle. You're the most courageous. You're the strongest. You've got the most victories.
He really should.
He knew we should. And we'll talk a little bit about, because we don't necessarily spend time recognizing how big a presence David was. We just kind of see him as King David, and we're Christians 3,000 years later. This was huge for him, for Nathan to do what he did.
Well, and that's to the point we've been talking about over the past several weeks. When it came to kingship in this day and time we're talking about, you lived at the pleasure of the king.
Yes.
And if that pleasure went away, so did your life.
Yes.
And so if you brought him unhappy news, too bad, so sad, goodbye.
Yes.
You know, and so it was not a good thing to be bringing this kind of accusation, like we talked about Nehemiah and Ezra and all these guys coming before, the king, Esther, excuse me. You didn't want to bring bad news to the king, because if you were the bearer of bad news, they shot the messenger.
Yes. And we even get a picture of this as early in Genesis as we get the cupbearer who's in jail with Joseph.
That's right.
You were called upon to do a job, and you couldn't just because you were the cupbearer go, "Hey, Kang, can we hang out a little bit?" It didn't go down that way. And you can read some of the difficulty in this when you read Esther's very purposeful, methodical way to get an invite from the king to be able to come into his presence to even begin to say, I think there's some impropriety. Because had she just decided, excuse me, king, can we?
She just can't walk in.
She would have been.
killed.
Correct.
Yes, she had to kind of get his eye first.
Correct.
And then be invited into the presence.
Yes. And I would tell you, without it getting into grand world history and European history, that the divine right of kings, in some ways, it comes in part because of kind of what Samuel imparts to Israel. That's in many ways, the divine right of kings is a scriptural concept, even though it's taken out of context. And that's why a lot of the kings, when they practiced atrocities, they said, when the popes would ask them in olden times, why and how did you provoke this wholesale slaughter? They would say, my right as king comes from God, and even you can't question what it is that my edict is. Now, taken out of context, severely so. But remember, that was kind of the warning that Samuel had to the Israelites when they said, we want a king, we want a king. And he said, look, there's going to be some awful things that the king's going to do if you get a king. You get a king man, he's going to take your wives, he's going to send your kids to battle. He's going to take your stuff, he's going to tax you to death. We don't care. We want a king.
You want to be like everybody else. The whole follow the crowd thing.
Correct.
And then there's also, fast forward a couple of millennia, 1611.
Sure.
We've got King Jimmy saying, I'd like this thing in English, please.
Yes.
And so they're looking at it and they go, well, pigs go, whoops, wait a minute. We don't do that the way that word means. So if we translate this the way it's supposed to be, we're going to all go on a crash diet. We don't like that. So, but we got to be true to the word. So you know what? I think we ought to make a new word.
Right.
And so they basically bring the Greek word over into English and say,
You define it.
figure it out yourself.
Correct. So what Brother Dean and hopefully we're doing with this phrase is helping understand the grandeur, the greatness of King David. You can't just walk into the king and go, excuse me, got some bad news for you, King.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good day for you. King David was dedicated to Yahweh from early childhood. The comment that I've got there is David was a singer-songwriter, and many of his songs were considered written in his youth. That sounds right.
It's Diane. Diane's here.
Okay.
Hi, Dan.
That sounds like it's the Addams family. Yeah.
She was getting
David / King David was a great musician, singer, songwriter, dancer.
Yeah, I like the dancing part.
See the Book of Psalms. David was harpist to King Saul. So after he took out Goliath, he didn't become general of the army. He became kind of male musician consort at the king's request.
Which can be a sticky position.
Literally. And if you want his Dancing with the Stars resume,
I love it.
see the Ark of the Covenant parade.
Love it.
Okay.
Macy's got nothing on that.
Pretty much. David was a man of tremendous, tremendous courage.
Oh, yeah.
When he was a boy, he took on lions and bears to protect his flock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my. Goliath, and most battles afterwards, enough said. You just read some of the conflicts, some of the skirmishes that David gets into. They're ones I would pretty much go, could I not at all be enlisted?
You know.
Right. And remember, there's not a whole lot except for arrows at the time, so it's not like you've got a gun where you can fend off a whole lot of people with your semi-automatic or your automatic. You're in with, if not fisticuffs, you've got sword to sword, hand-to-hand combat.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good army I'd like to be
not a
part of.
fan. Huh?
You know, I have to interject here. On my one and only trip to England, I got a chance to go through an armory at a castle. I didn't get to the actual Tower of London where this sort of thing existed, but at Warwick Castle, they had an armory. And they had weapons there that were flesh mutilating weapons. I mean, we're talking swords that were serrated like saws. You can just imagine the carnage when you see these weapons. You can imagine the carnage on the battlefield. It wasn't as nice and clean, or like our movies portray, where they've got a clip that holds 700 rounds. You know, they seem to never have to reload. But they were, it was face to face, and it was brutal. And
Correct.
we really don't get that.
No, we don't. And this guy was a victor of several of those kinds of campaigns. Several of them. So, in terms of tough, I would tell you, I would suggest, Michaela, not that David and his son would go at it, but I think David would take Solomon 10 out of 10 falls. David was a tough hombre.
Oh, yeah.
He was an incredible warrior. There's a tune. David is slain. King Saul was slain as thousands. David is slain
10,000.
as 10,000. By the way, that was probably the first thing that got Saul all icky. Got him all mad.
All icky.
He later wielded Goliath's own sword. Now, do you know how tremendous? Good face, Michaela. You know how tremendous that is. Here's why this is neat. Remember when he encountered Goliath, or when he was going to encounter Goliath? What's the first thing that happened? When David goes, I'm going to take on Goliath. What then happens after that? Right after that.
You talking about the armor that he tries out?
Yes.
That don't work? Because the dude whose armor it is a head taller than he is.
Correct.
It'd be like me trying to wear your clothes.
I don't know. Okay. I don't know what you're saying.
But you're so tall
Oh, good
compared
spin.
to me.
Good spin.
Oh, no spin there. It's the height difference that would have been the same thing. Saul was a head taller than anybody else in
Correct.
the kingdom,
Correct.
which means whatever he had to wear didn't no one else.
Correct. Correct. And so, youngster putting on the king's armor wasn't happening the right way. So David pretty much makes the choice of, let me just go out with what I normally fight in and pick up 6 stones. Okay. So it's remarkable that he's grown from the little kid who couldn't wear the king's armor to now he can handle Goliath's sword. You know what kind of biceps, the kind of strength this guy must have had?
Goliath was
Big.
compared to Saul would have been
A giant.
Big.
a giant.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the other funny part of that whole encounter. If anybody should have gone after this dude, it would have been the biggest dude in town, and he's whimpering over in the corner.
Yeah.
And just get a picture here. If Goliath were to come into our meeting today, he would have to stoop to come into that doorway, and then have to stand in that corner to try not to bump his head on the ceiling. And that's what that David's standing up against.
Yes.
And like you said, his sword, for the guy 9.5 feet tall to be able to wield it and be comfortable with it, had to have been huge for David to handle.
Correct.
It's the size of the fight in the dog, not
Yes.
the dog in the fight.
Yes. And that's what makes David so spectacular, because
Well, here.
the Lord shapes him into a mighty man.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, he calls him a man after his own heart. We'll talk about that more later. But he's got the physical wherewithal to be able to manage Goliath's sword.
Mm-hmm.
That's remarkable. From being a punk kid who couldn't wear armor. Amazing / godly faith. David's love for Yahweh was well known and publicly visible. It was on display.
Yep.
Even when he wasn't dancing for the stuff.
Yeah.
It was on display. People knew David loved Yahweh God. David regularly inquired of the Lord and asked what he should do next without the situation being dire. David was a guy who didn't go, "Oh Lord, I don't know what to do next. Please give me a message. Let me know." David would say, "Okay, what do I do now, Lord?"
He did it ahead of time.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily do.
No, we only do it when I can't handle it.
Mhm.
And I think I need the Lord to intercede. David would do it right now. David's also done it when he's going, "I don't know what else to do, and I need a hand." If the Lord can, he did it then, but he also just did it regularly, which is a wonderful model and example for us. David built altars. And you don't see that very much at this point in the Bible after the patriarchs kind of doing things. So now you're watching King David in a more civilized world, in a kingdom sense, having skirmishes and building altars. It's remarkable. He's a modern guy building altars. It's one thing for the Israelites to look back and see Isaac and Jacob and Abraham building altars because they're in the middle of nowhere. But King David is doing this now in modern civilization. Modern's relative. They didn't have MTV. We don't have MTV yet because
I'm sorry, didn't go away from being MTV anymore. It's more just shows.
yeah, it hasn't been MTV since Jump.
The very first video. That's literally the very first video. Because I saw it.
That's how mature service. Grandly loyal, respectful, and equitable. All right, here's some of the bullets. David's friendship with Jonathan is so special, it's often misrepresented by today's culture.
You think?
His relationship with Jonathan is so special, there's a group of people that are trying to capture that and claim that it's not what it was. I will leave that up to your fertile imagination. David's love for King Saul is mind-boggling, especially because the king regularly and often wished to kill him.
Mm-hmm. And yet, David, when given an opportunity, at least twice, says, "No, I don't think so." As easy as it would be, and even his own guys say, "Look, the Lord has delivered him into your hand."
Exactly.
You know, he says, "No, I don't think so. There's a command that overrides that says I'm not supposed to raise my hand to God's anointed, and the king is God's anointed."
If you want an example of modern day professed, hopefully possessed believer, this is an example of love your enemies.
That's right.
Because if King Saul is out for my head, and I have an opportunity while he's taking a leak. Oh, I'm sorry, was that too graphic?
I'm not even sure it was just the leak. That's another matter.
I'm trying to make it PG rated, sir.
PG, thank you.
If I have an opportunity to take out this bully who's been making my life difficult, my boy, I got Jerry next to me saying, "The Lord has delivered him into your hands." You know what pretty much is going to happen to King Saul?
He's gone.
Thank you. Lunch money and everything else, I'm taking it. So the fact that David had this kind of loyalty, this kind of respect, this kind of temperedness makes him a pretty remarkable guy. Not killing Saul, I have kindness to Mephibosheth.
Yes.
Say that 3 times fast.
Mephibosheth.
That's
I had to type that going. Yeah, okay. It was hard.
Yeah, and that's why people like to just kind of skip it over, because there's a whole lot of chefs and Abimelechs that just go, "I'd rather just say lawnmower, lawnmower, lawnmower." Mephibosheth is from the family of Saul. Now, if you think that it's bad enough sometimes that when, and we won't make a big deal of this, but it's pretty amazing sometimes. The fact that Bruce hangs out and worships with us, and he's our old, figuratively old, lead elder is remarkable, because typically leaders need to get out of the way when a new leadership happens. And so it was customary in the old times that especially if someone became king by coup or king through aggressive nature, you couldn't just kill the king.
Oh yeah, take care of the family.
You had to kill the king and all of his relatives.
That's right.
Because in some ways they were duty bound to practice revenge when they had an opportunity on you.
That's right.
David not only does he show kindness to Mephibosheth, he seeks him out and says, are there any living relatives of Saul? And if they are, I want them at the king's table. It is there. It's going to be my pleasure that they will get to sup with the king. And even later than that, a servant of Mephibosheth comes to King David and says, Mephibosheth used to own potentially a whole lot of stuff. And David says, then what it is that potentially he used to own, give it back to him. Do you know how generous and magnanimous a nature that is? That's not me. I don't operate that way.
They were a little suspicious. At first, when he invited back to the table,
Oh, yeah.
it's just a way to get us.
They're being invited
Take us
back
out.
to dinner.
By a supper.
No last supper. Yeah. Right.
They're being
And,
invited to.
well, the cupbearer doesn't try what Mephibosheth is going to drink. So yes, I agree that Mephibosheth was trying to go on, and his servant was going, "What's really the deal here?" Until they experienced that King David was just a generous, God-blessed dude. Inspirational leader. There's not enough I can say about David's 30-plus mighty men. David had a core of mighty men, of which Uriah was one, right? And that's how we know that this whole Uriah thing wasn't right. Because Uriah is I think he's the last guy named in the mighty men. And these mighty men there's three who are giants, along with, meaning not physically giants. They're just huge in terms of the campaign. And they're kind of 3+ with David. And then the rest of the guys all get battle kudos. So David pretty much with these 30 guys would, in addition to his other troops, would mop up whoever you sent at these guys.
Across the street from David, looking at his courtyard, says something.
It does say something
He
else.
was in her inner circle.
Yeah,
The fact that Uriah was a Hittite and Israelite.
Yes.
correct. Which is also part why maybe King David felt okay in making that call, because he wasn't true brethren. In many ways, he's a band of brothers, if you guys understand that concept, which is there's a bond there that's almost stronger than blood brothers. And so even usurping that situation to put Uriah in the position that he did was almost doubly a terrible thing. But you're right. It's his right as the king to do terrible things, and Uriah was not an Israelite. Somebody in virtual land?
Diane, I think.
Okay. Hey, Diane.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, I must have, that was my husband coming in the doorway, so sorry, I thought I had myself on mute.
Okay.
Nothing worse.
Outstanding battle strategist. Let me read the last two before I read the first one. He began wiping out enemies of the Israelites while living among the Philistines. That was so violent. By the way, if all this stuff sounds new to you, you got to read through First Samuel and then 2 Samuel. Okay. The city of Jerusalem was conquered, and the Israel territory was the largest under his kingship. Jerusalem wasn't always the Israelites, so David took it back thousands of years later. He acts like a crazy man in the midst of his enemies to avoid getting killed. When he first finds himself running from Saul and he's in the middle of the Philistines are going, this dude is not our friend. So what's David do? He's not king yet. He starts acting like he's nuts. And they go, you can't kill a nut. Guy's nuts. This is put him somewhere to live with.
It was the first declaration of temporary insanity.
It was. That saved the guy's life.
We do now.
And that was a strategy by David, because David's going, somebody's going to kill me. So why don't I act nuts? And he does. He's detail-oriented. He established headquarters and officials in addition to rulership all through Israel. So he knew kind of what was going on all through Israel because he set up a system that allowed him to be able to do that. He understood taking ground meant also keeping track of where the ground was that was taken. He surrounded himself with quality people. Jonathan, Joab, Abner, Abigail, Uriah, Nathan, and Gad. So he was a well-informed king who knew how to surround himself with smart people, let alone the 30 mighty men. He was a futurist and a visionary. David believed in a permanent location for the ark and a return to grandeur to a grander centralized worship. He developed a plan for this vision, and it was completed by his son, Solomon.
Make Israel great again.
Yes. I'm not commenting on that.
Ego.
Sorry.
Where he was not so good, husband and father. He was pretty terrible on those fronts. Yeah, I second and third that. Let me leave you with this comment, and I want us to jump in and take a look at the conflict, confrontation that has to do with you and me. The scriptures rarely or never depict perfect people. This is for our benefit.
Hallelujah.
These giant patriarchs and matriarchs experienced accountability issues that might have been thwarted with the right combination of truthful, bold, circumspective, trustworthy, and caring interactions of people. Let me see if I can help you understand what I mean by this. I can't say that this always happens for real because I've never committed a crime this large.
But not large.
Thank you.
I'm just chuckling that.
That's not on film. When
It
I
is
say that,
actually.
yeah.
It is
Okay.
recorded.
So now people are going to be looking for my crime history. You guys have seen shows that depict heists. You've all seen shows where there's a great bank heist or the Lufthansa heist or some other kind of stuff, right? And the key is, in many ways, it's such a great heist that all they have to do is shut up about it, and they'll get away with it. Now, you've watched these movies, but what typically happens with those grand heists?
Somebody goes and brags.
Right. Now, I think that when we talk about the suicides increasing in Japan, that's an explanation, that's a depiction in some ways of the gregarious and social nature we have. We can't just keep things confined to ourselves, even when they're bad. We want to tell somebody. Now, I don't know that that's always the case, but here's what I'm going to suggest to you. I believe that when King David stayed home, somebody had a question as to why King David was home in the middle of campaign season. Right? I believe that someone knew that King David was hanging up on his rooftop, not necessarily doing kingly things. You guys get to push back. This is not the Bible. This is conjecture.
Well, he's going to be people around him, isn't there?
He's the king.
I mean, I would
He's the king.
imagine he's going to have people. Now, of course, they're paid to keep their mouth shut,
Yes.
but there's people.
Yes.
I don't
He sent
know.
for somebody and asked about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Right.
And you'd imagine
Right.
the gossip mill.
Yes.
Maybe.
Right. I mean, I think if you're talking heist, this is the worst heist ever.
He couldn't even not shut up for the start.
Right.
He did it.
Right. The king's liking her, and he goes, "Go send for her and have her come." Dude, do you understand? There are no satellites and cameras, but pretty much everybody's watching you. So he is doing this as the king out in the open, but he thinks it's a secret. Nobody says anything. Nobody says anything.
Because he's the king.
Yes. Yes. And guys, I'm trying to help you to understand that although the Lord knows when we pull our junk, typically when you pull your junk, you know, and sometimes because of the social nature we have, we tell somebody else that there's some junk I have. That person may be our confidant, our closest friend, etc. And sometimes we don't tell our friend because we want our friend to tell us not to do it. We just tell our friend because we have to tell somebody. That's not the case here with King David. But in this case, there are several people that knew that he was probably engaging in something that wasn't God honoring. So why didn't anybody tell him? Okay?
They probably feared for their lives if they were to tell him he was doing something.
Okay? I like it. I agree with you completely. So let's expand that a little bit. So, are there Yahweh believers that occupy the court of King David?
Should be. I would imagine there should be. I mean,
Would expect.
yeah, I mean, it just makes logical sense.
We know at least Nathan and Gad were because they're prophets. So at least those two occupy the kingdom, but there are probably other people that are closer to David because David probably going to surround himself with good people, but also people that love Yahweh God. Is it fair to say, and you get to rip this apart if we want to discuss this a couple moments, okay? Is it fair to say that they love their own life more than they love Yahweh God?
If they didn't say anything, it kind of lends itself to that. Yeah. It goes back to the whole conflict and avoiding the issues because you don't want to deal with it. Because yeah, yeah, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no. Yeah, they're all three monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be kind enough, me personally, to give those guys a 5 from that period of time.
You are?
Yes.
Wow.
They were waiting on that.
Sorry, Preston. I'm
You know,
just
I liked her
shocked.
better when she was new.
Now she's like family.
Exactly. Well, here's why. The Jews pre-Jesus didn't have a clear understanding of the afterlife. So they didn't know really what to expect. So I'm going to be at least kinder when I look at them and see them fearful for their life versus fearful of Yahweh, not knowing what side to come up on.
Well, it also included their family, right?
Yes.
It wasn't just
Could.
them being taken out. It was
Yes.
Loyalty was. That
loyalty
king
to
was
who?
right, the king.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying.
He was considered next to God,
Correct. But he was wrong.
appointed by God.
But he was wrong.
But he was wrong.
He was wrong. I would suggest very strongly that after the time of Jesus, when Jesus clearly taught about the afterlife and stuff, people now have less of an excuse to not get involved to correct wrongdoing nowadays. You guys see where we're kind of going with this?
I saw you painting us into a corner earlier. So we had no place to go if we were going to support all of what you were saying. So we had no excuse because anybody we try to confront about eternity is not going to be removing our head.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, consequences were a little more brutal.
Yes.
Like that, a lot more brutal.
But we're still afraid to engage. And they can't kill you. They can try to cancel you. They can make you unpopular streaming. They can cyberbully you. But they can't kill you.
I think that time may be changing.
Yeah.
That may be correct. Yes. But it does depend on what country you're in.
Or state.
Yes. But that's why Americans, you need to build up David-like muscle right now and be able to handle Goliath's sword. Now, if you've been believers for quite a period of time, you weren't able to put on the armor at one point in time. But right now, for some of us who have professed believers for a while, Goliath's sword should be that with which we can wield.
Oh my. Reference Ephesians 6.
Yes, sir. Putting on the whole spiritual armor.
Yes. How cool.
So your sword of truth should be huge and always at the ready.
And sharp.
Yes.
And practiced.
Yes.
I mean, she goes to the dojo. She doesn't practice so much at home. She ought to practice some at home too.
Yes.
So that, she's got these skills down. Same thing is true when it comes to the sword of the Spirit. We
Yes.
need to be practicing that. We need to be studying that.
Correct.
Someone shared with me years ago that I apparently did not remember very well, but short version is, someone came to them and said that they had chosen Christ and they had, they had found they've been baptized and they were, my words, become Christians, right? And they looked at the person and they were like, "Oh, great, me too. We've been Christians for years." And they were like, "Really? You just were going to let me just, go through my life without sharing that with me and trying to convince me?" And never. I mean, to the point, they were just trying to explain to them, don't not tell people. Just let me we're close friends, and we're, whatever, you never said that.
Right. Because a lot, you're so right in this revelation. A lot of Christians are undercover.
Mhm.
And when you find out they're Christians, it's like, you go undercover too. Then you admit, we're Christians too. But the funny thing is, that's the opposite of what the scriptures tell us we should be doing. We should be loudly walking places and going, excuse me, I believe in Jesus. How about you?
Just don't ride a bicycle or wait, button down. Because people will not let you talk to them.
Okay. Part of that, though, Chris, has to do with you're 17 years old and you're coming up to my door and you're introducing yourself as an elder. I want to punch you. That's just bizarre.
Yeah.
So they're doing themselves a disservice by doing that. That's when I punch them in their bow tie. But what you just said exists, is that you find out someone for years has been a Christian, but it's been a covert Christian. That's our society now. And Gene's right. The get involved penalty for you saying what potentially is going to be a confrontation is right now not death in the United States. So gang, you need to wield your citizenship differently than maybe you are. Your citizenship that's United States oriented and your citizenship that's eternity oriented. And you need to develop the muscles to be able to have a big old sword that maybe you couldn't lift when you were a baby new believer, that now you regularly have at the ready. Nathan was told by God to go and confront David. But I think Jesus told us all we're supposed to confront the world with the gospel that is his good news.
As we do.
Correct. So, we're at the end of our study on 2 Samuel. So, 2 Samuel 12:7. Nathan said to David, "You are the man, thus says the Lord God of Israel." So I want to make some points here and then maybe have us discuss these as we close today. Nathan was a close, trusted friend. So much so that Bathsheba and David have another kid. You know what the name is? David. But he doesn't not smile like me. He's a very smiling baby and he's happy.
He was a smiling kid all the time too. Then he got older.
Well, we've seen pictures. So, he spoke truth to David, even when that truth was difficult to hear. He was loyal in his service to the king and faithful to Yahweh God and his word. Guys, I don't know how to, I can't tell you I do this well all the time, but I do this well after we are in community and even in community. We've got to be willing to lay down our mortal lives for the cause of the gospel. And Gene and Jerry and even Steve kind of alluded to that may become the law of the land at some point in time, even though it seems far-fetched for us to believe. But where we are now is far-fetched for us to believe that we're here. Right? So, and in other countries where there are missionaries who are secret missionaries, if you are caught evangelizing, it is a death sentence. And I would almost tell you, beheading is the best of the kind, because there are tortures that these countries can enact in order to extrude, to get information from you, even though you've told them everything that is true, just because torture is the name of the game, because you're a Christian. And we're not there yet in the United States, so I would almost tell you, if we don't build that muscle before Christianity is hate speech, the gospel is going to struggle in terms of Christians building muscle. David understood this, that truth is always truth, even when you don't like it or want it to be the truth. I battled with some Christians about this, and this is where this point is. You need to go to a person a certain way and say it in love a certain way. I understand that as a person who lives in jerk store. I understand that. But here's the thing. The truth is the truth, even if I say it with utter disdain for you and everything else. If I tell you that gravity exists and you go, I don't like the way you said it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means you don't like the way I said it. But truth is truth is truth. People get bent by that, but surprisingly, Christians almost get more insulted by that. Because church or worship groups are not a place where people think it's okay to have confrontations to say, you're the man. To have confrontations to say, you did this in a way that just didn't work for me, and I need to tell you about it. Well, the fact that you're telling about that means this is not the church home for me, so I'm leaving. Truth is truth is truth. One reason David is called a man after Yahweh, God's own heart, is, watch this, it's one reason. It's because he recognized, or he understands that there's a remedy for his sin issues. He understands that sin is fixable. You understand how grand a concept that is? David understood that he was stinking the place up, and he could regularly stink the place up. But he understood that if sin was his only issue, that his relationship with Yahweh God could fix that. That was pre-Jesus. That's remarkable. Here's my last bulletin. I'm pretty much done. Believers should have a real, honest, and regular accountability partner who can say the tough truths. You don't got one, find one. A real accountability partner who can tell you when you're stinking it up. Confrontation is not a bad thing if based on truth. And the desired outcome is a change, reversal, or cessation, even if the event is or feels negative. When you want to tell me something and I don't want to hear it, the very first response I have is the look that was just on my face, I think that Chris is responding to, which is whoop-de-doo for you. And then my second response is, who is you to tell me anything? Then my third response is, how hard can I punch you? Then my fourth response is, goodbye.
Our spouse should not be our accountability partner.
You know, you have to have a mature relationship over years where you know that you're going to get angry and upset and passionate with each other, but at the end of the day, all is still well. And I would tell you, the people that get our goat the most are the people we care about. If we don't care about people, they don't really ruffle our feathers. It's the people who are closest to us that make us the maddest, that can also kind of peeve us off the most. Because we spend most time with those folks. Those are the folks that sometimes take for granted that it's okay to leave this much Captain Crunch in the box. that it's okay to leave the water faucet drip, 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 drip. When they should have just turned it off all of them. And those aren't sins, but those are things like, didn't you know you shouldn't have done that? Who you tell me in my own house that I need to turn it off? Can I knock your block off? So we got to get comfortable with confrontation and conflict and recognize that sometimes people bringing something to my attention brings about a change. Let me give you a silly example of that in a really interesting way, I hope, before we move on to this next and last point. I've said this before, you've heard us do this teaching. If you've ever been pulled over by a cop, I don't even know what that look is, and I'm not going to comment, but I saw that look from you.
He hasn't yet.
Right, but the look he just had suggests secretly it's already happened several times.
Well, 3 out of 4 of us have, but he hasn't yet.
Yeah, but when someone's
that took you the wrong impression. I got pulled over in your car because your back lights went on.
No, it was the front light.
No, it wasn't. Whatever light it
It
was.
was the front light.
It's your fault.
They won't pull you for anything like that
you are the man is kind of what I'm
You're
getting
supposed to
from
inspect your vehicle every time you get in it.
Bravo.
Well, it was working before. It was working when we
Yeah,
left the
what's
house.
when we left?
It stopped working as we were driving down the road.
Oh, I've been there, done that.
So it was working. So
And in
there.
Florida, they actually give you fix-it tickets.
That's nice we've done a citation.
Okay. We didn't
They
get
give you a
anything. He just
ticket
said, go
that you
fix your
have to
light.
get it
I said,
fixed.
yes, sir.
And then you have to pay the ticket.
Oh, well, that's not so good.
And he laughed at me the whole time.
We were been only a month
Assumption.
in Florida, and that happened to us.
Well, you guys were just getting used to Florida then. You didn't know there were fix-it tickets.
No, we
out there.
didn't. That wasn't an excuse.
No, and that's why the police give you a ticket too, because they say the fact that you don't know is not an excuse.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly, well, yeah.
And I would suggest for many of us here, if you ever get caught, especially in a speed trap, you never get caught twice in the same speed trap. Why not?
That's a true statement.
Why?
Because then you learn.
Because the confrontation with the cop, although a negative one, and you probably were exceeding the speed limit, even if I don't know, you always know now when you go through there that that's the speed limit, right? That's a conflict and confrontation that's not negative, and the cop's not going, "Hey, I won't give you a ticket today because I'm your friend." That's not what's happening. What's happening is you're about to potentially go to court, pay some fines, when you should just go, "Could you just warn me and let me go on my way? Just go out and get the real criminals." Right? But you never get the same speeding ticket in the same place because you learn. That encounter, as negative as conflicting as it was, the truth of the statement is the speed limit there is 35. You don't exceed 35 there anymore. It wasn't presented in love. Listen from a guy I like. Yes, sir.
May I read something? This is, I'm going to tell you where it's from after I read it. And this is slam in the middle of something, so you're going to hear a however in the midst of this that goes to the context. Okay? The Holy Spirit, however, permits us to censure sin and prescribes the way in which we are to do it. It must be done by rebuking our brother to his face, not by railing behind his back. This course is manly, brotherly, Christ-like, and under God's blessing will be useful. Does the flesh shrink from it? Then we must lay the greater stress upon our conscience and keep ourselves to the work, lest by suffering sin upon our friend, we become ourselves partakers of it. Hundreds have been saved from gross sins by the timely, wise, affectionate warnings of faithful ministers and brethren.
Yes.
That is Spurgeon's morning and evening this morning. This morning's reading. I like it. God's good.
Look, we're dealing with a guy who was born in the 1800s, and he's talking frankly to a believer body in good old England, in good old Europe, to let them know confrontation has to happen face to face. And I know it makes a lot of us uncomfortable. Public speaking, which is supposed to be received well, makes us uncomfortable, let alone having to tell somebody, "You're the man. You're the person stinking up the place right now." 2 bullet points and then we're done. Confrontation may occur differently, according to your situation, the severity, the urgency, your personality, and spiritual gifts. Steve very likely is going to tell you the same thing very differently than I will, even if we both see the same thing. And then the urgency and the severity, depending on how much of a necessity it is for us to impart that to you, is going to dictate in some ways how the encounter occurs. Think about it. This happens sometimes with your kid, parents to kids. Your kid's about to touch the stove. They're a youngster, right? They're about to touch it right now. And your intervention and confrontation with them looks how? And that, and maybe some violence attached to it, because you'd rather have them deal with the sting of that than the, whoops, 3rd-degree burns. Right?
ER.
Sure.
You don't have time to stop and discuss the merits of why you should or should not do that.
You're grabbing the kid and pulling them away
Right.
and jerking them away,
Right.
typically.
Correct. Because saving them from injury, and remember, when we talk about believership, we're looking to save their lives. Sometimes has a desperate, aggressive component attached to it. I think we're less desperate in modern times than we have been. Just less desperate because we've got so many things occupying and vying for our time. When there was only reading, and back in the time of David, etc., there wasn't even really reading because there were no books. The Jews were probably a group of people that were literate, but most other communities were not literate. There weren't books. There was certainly no radio, little Wi-Fi, no TV. They had Sprint, I think, which is a terrible carrier for those of you that have Sprint. Yeah, right.
They might have Prime Code.
Oh yeah, I think they didn't get that in Jerusalem.
Well, that might be.
But you gotta know when things are going on.
Wow,
around
you're
the
really
world,
going back.
You know, when things are going wrong around the palace, you got to know that Twitter was blowing up.
Sure. And look, gang, before there was Twitter, before there was Instagram, before there was Snapchat, there's always people just running their mouths. Somebody knows junk.
And if they don't know junk, you make it up.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I hear you. I hear those experiences sounding personal. Yes, people make up junk. But you got a whole lot of people. Yeah. And look, we've said it a ton of time. Church people are almost the worst people to hang out with. When they're just being church people. There's a difference between church people and Jesus people.
Yeah, that's right.
Church people are hanging out in the club looking to find out how to make themselves feel good. Jesus people recognize that the whole point is glorifying Him. Okay. Last point before this, and then the floor is open for you. Many, I kind of said this paraphrasing the time we've been together, many great, grand, historical achievements are a result of person-to-person conflict. Here's some examples. The freedom of the Israelites, conquering Canaan, translation of the Bible, the United States, the Emancipation Proclamation, civil rights laws, women's suffrage, democracy, the Roman Catholic Church, etc., etc. A lot of these institutions or these changes, these historical landmarks, are because of head-to-head, person-to-person conflicts. Now, we live in a relatively peaceful society and world, even though it's tumultuous, right? But there's no drafts. There's no war that we have to have our kids go into right now. And so, by and large, we're kind of milquetoasty in regard to understanding that the freedoms that we live, that right now in many ways we want to say are not okay, were paid for with people's lives in skirmishes and conflicts. So we're not a society right now based in the reality of our forefathers, and when I mean our forefathers, maybe the greatest generation, who knew that sometimes freedom takes death. Freedom takes sacrifice. That's not us. We have a whole lot of easy believism. And so our churches are easy believism, our music is easy believism, our education system is easy believism, our society, our economic structure is moving toward easy believism. It doesn't take any skirmishes or anything for you to just get and for you to have. And that's not what this country used to be. And Christianity 101 is similar to something that Chris said earlier. Christianity 101, you got on fire Christians. Christianity 102 is kind of when people begun to wane because they're not winning a whole lot of people with Jesus. And many of us don't get to Christianity 201 because by that time, we've been Christians for 18 years. And right now, I like my seat just the way it is. I like communion how I like it. And preacher better not go on too long because I've got lunch at KFC. We don't contend for the faith anymore. We're punks. And that's why when the JWs come to your house, a lot of you good Christians, close the curtains. All of a sudden, make sure your ring is occupying so you know when they're gone. And don't let the elders of the Latter-day Saints roll up on your house, because then you're really not there. And gang, that's not contending for the faith. The conflict that may help those young men or those people avoid an eternity apart from the Lord is for you to say, guys, you don't got it right. Let's open up the scriptures together and let's help you see where you're missing the boat on this. And I know that that's a tough assignment for me to suggest exists. That's the bigger one in terms of our Christian idea. But we've come all the way from even talking about, folks, conflict in your daily life may not be a bad thing. If you can get to practicing conflict and confrontation in your real life that's about positive change, then maybe it'll build up your Christian muscles so you can be able to go, dudes, Jesus is the answer. Everything else, stupid. And you won't be worried about cancel. You won't be worried about how many unfriendings you receive. You won't be worried about that stuff in the same. COVID won't scare you if eternity is looming larger. All right, floor is open for you as we transition on.
Teacher, I got a question. My question.
Run.
My question is, as you look at the American landscape today and society today, in your opinion, which now means there is no wrong answer, to which reign in Israel would you liken it? Personal opinion.
So, Gene's question is one that suggests we'd have to know a little bit about the Bible and the kingships that occurred. It's hard to suggest that. I would tell you, it's really easy to see us kind of as Rehoboam's people, in part because we feel like we've been overtaxed and we want to make some changes, but at the same time, who I'm listening to are the neighboring nabobs. I think, and when I say that, I'm talking about Rehoboam, we're talking about right after Solomon dies.
Right.
That's when there's the schism that occurs. So you've got Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Jeroboam is kind of the popular guy that they want to rule as a king. He's going to rule over the southern kingdom, and Rehoboam's going to take vice versa. Rehoboam's going to take the two other tribes, and Jeroboam's going to take the other 10. And Rehoboam is Solomon's son, who's a nitwit. And Rehoboam is coming out of his dad's kingdom where Solomon's been overtaxing people. Solomon's been taking advantage of the fact that he's king in order to probably pay off a lot of debts from having multiple wives and concubines. And there's a schism that happens because Rehoboam is not going to listen to folks who say, give the people relief. Don't impede on their personal freedoms and personal lives anymore. And his young friends, who are his pals, are saying, dude, you're the king. Tax them out the wazoo. So I think that there's a combination of that, and maybe even, I would like to believe that potentially we're looking at, we've got the potential to have a King Manasseh.
That's what I was thinking a minute ago.
King Manasseh, who's the worst king probably ever, except his dad was a good dude, Hezekiah. And his prophet was a great dude, Isaiah. So we've got the possibility to have a terrible rulership, but really good, godly people. So there's the throw up for me.
A lot of cultures.
Right. Yes, sir.
Good insights. Thank you. I like that. I like that a lot.
Other stuff before we transition on. This is trite, stupid stuff. What are you talking about? That's non-existent. You're making that jump up.
Now you're talking COVID. Sorry.
As you know the song, greater is he that is in me. Somebody finish that. Yeah. You know, if Christians believe that, what a wonderful world this would be.
Amen.
Right? We have the possibility to have that kind of a great awakening. And that's kind of what we're trying to build our muscles to, so that we're not a church on the block. We are part of a global understanding that Yahweh still owns this place, even though the Prince of Power of the Air gets to do some dirty stuff every now and again. And believers, we're okay with that because God's sovereign. Struggle with that. I know this is tough. See the book of Job. All right, going once, going twice. Virtual people.
I don't see Diana. She's here. Bruce, you got something? Diana, you got something?
Nope, everything was great. Thanks, Preston.
Wow, I must be paying people more. No push that. All right, so I think we're going to kind of get into if life is good. We're going to go one or two ways next week. We're going to go potentially some conjecture and study. And I can't tell you which way we'll go. Either we're going to take a look at why did Judas do what he did, or we're going to take a look at the fundamentals of mankind and why man is mucking it up so badly. So I can't tell you which one we're going to go in because it'll depend on kind of what happens during the course of the week.